Hi, Rachel. How are you?
Hi, doing well. How are you?
Hey, well, we are very envious, very jealous of where you were yesterday. So tell us, we're on the side of our seat here. What took place?
Some people actually had a much better seat than I did, which was inside the courtroom because I didn't get to go inside. But and no cameras were allowed, and actually no audio from this one. But there is 77 pages of oral arguments if you really want to read it. So what happened yesterday was the oral argument for McDonald versus City of Chicago, and it was addressing whether or not the Second Amendment should be applied to state and local governments through the incorporation of the 14th Amendment. A big mouthful of legal mumbo-jumbo, but it's very important news and very important to the Second Amendment and all of those folks out there, especially those in Chicago and the village of Oak Park who do not have the ability to even keep a firearm in their home for self-protection. It's absolutely outrageous. It's the most strict handgun ban in the country, and it's very similar to what was in Washington, D.C. Oral arguments were yesterday. My feet are still frozen from standing on the marble for an hour yesterday after oral argument. But it was such an amazing experience, and it's very important to know that in front of the 9 Supreme Court justices, Alan Gura and Paul Clement were up there speaking on behalf of the Second Amendment and on behalf of incorporation of the Second Amendment, which is such monumental news.
Now, Rachel, I have heard that this is one of the exceptions, actually, that someone has told me that the Supreme Court judges really became very involved in this and sort of dressed down both sides from time to time.
That's what we're hearing, and you know, there's a lot of analysis out there from newspapers and Supreme Court experts. We're optimistic that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of incorporating the Second Amendment through the 14th Amendment. Whether they go through the Privilege or Immunities Clause or the Due Process Clause is still yet to be determined. But you know, we're very optimistic. We're hopeful. We don't know what kind of implications this is going to have on the Second Amendment and on gun laws all across this country because we simply cannot speculate what the decision will say. But up until June, it's going to be very interesting to analyze and think about it and go through all of the potential scenarios.
Did you have an opportunity to meet Mr. McDonald?
I did not meet him. I did see him from across the way. I actually got to meet Paul Clement, which was the NRA's counsel. Very brilliant and very interesting man. So that was very interesting and great for me. But I did not get to meet McDonald. I have met Alan Gura on occasion or two. And again, you know, we're just really excited that the Second Amendment is again in front of the Supreme Court and will be further defined come June when we anticipate a decision.
You know, Rachel, I'm going to just check my facts for a minute, but I believe Mr. McDonald is, I'm trying to think of, I know I wrote down his age. I'm going to put a face on this case because a lot of people get very involved in what's going on with the case, but they don't really understand. We're talking about a man here that I believe he was 76 years old. Okay?
Yes, and he's lived on the south side of Chicago for nearly 40 years and has had his home broken into on several occasions. And he fears for his life, and he wants to be able to be an equal in his own home. And if someone comes in, a criminal who is armed, he wants to be able to protect himself as well. And I think that denying law-abiding Americans the right and the ability to protect themselves in their own homes is absolutely outrageous. It's unconstitutional, and we are hopeful that the Supreme Court will agree with 309 congressmen from both chambers, 38 state attorneys generals, and the majority of the American people.
Yeah, and in my own dyslexic way, I apologize. He is 76 years old. I might have said 67. He may feel like 67. But I know he came from Louisiana when he was 17 years old. He worked as a janitor and a maintenance engineer. And I have a quote here that says, he was finally able to obtain a nice house to live in on the south side. And he was, you know, beginning to enjoy his life, and the neighborhood sort of fell off around him. And he simply says, I kind of have a feeling I'm on my own out here, and I would just feel much better if I had a gun that I had access to. Now, this is not an unreasonable thing to ask for. And after all, I mean, the man has worked hard all of his life. You know, he's not ultra left or ultra right. He's just saying, hey, I want a gun in my home because I feel unsafe in the neighborhood. This is not something so extreme that we all can't identify with it. And besides that, I think there's some more, you know, McDonald's name is on the case, but there are other people actually listed in that case as well, aren't there?
There are other people listed in the case. His name is on the case. He is a very telling, very appropriate story, a great plaintiff for this case. You know, you're right. It's very mainstream to want to protect yourself in your own home. I mean, self-defense and self-preservation is a human right. It's not a right that is given to us by our Constitution. It's a right that pre-existed our Constitution. It's just that we had very intelligent founding fathers who wanted us to who wanted a Constitution there to protect that right, to further guarantee it through, you know. So we think that this is great news for the Second Amendment. We're hopeful. We're optimistic. Again, I would never be so presumptuous as to assume or speculate what the Supreme Court would decide, but we are very hopeful and optimistic. We think that incorporating the Second Amendment is, number one, important, number two, very reasonable.
Okay, tell us what the next step is. Where do we go from here then?
The next step is a waiting game. We are standing by. We're waiting for the Supreme Court to make their decision, which we're anticipating coming up in June. I don't know when in June. We don't tell the Supreme Court what to do. They pretty much do what they want and tell us later. So we are just awaiting to hear their decision. Once we hear their decision, and it could go in several ways, we'll go from there. If we need to file more lawsuits, we will, and we'll figure it out at that point. But until then, we're just waiting around to hear what they have to say. Yeah,
well, that's the Supreme Court. Actually, I'm a little surprised that there is a June date. I sort of thought this would stretch out much longer than that, so I think a lot of us will be happy to learn that it's only going to be a couple of months.
That's right, a couple of months. They have to make all their decisions before the end of June because that's the end of their term. So we're hopeful that it'll be sooner rather than later, but you never know. It's a very tough decision. It's going to be a lot of work for them, a lot of judicial analysis, and so they're going to take a lot of time, and we encourage that. We want them to make sure to get it right, and we hope that they side on the side of law-abiding people, law-abiding Americans who simply want to protect.
Let me ask you: are things going to go silent for the next couple of months, or are you going to be able to say, "Hey, they came out, they said something. I've got some more information." I mean, are we all just going to have to sit and wait?
We're probably all going to have to sit and wait and occupy our time with analyzing what the scenarios that could potentially happen, or just continue working on other state and local legislation as well as legislation that's up in Congress. So we are always working on things, but as far as this is concerned, we're probably not going to have a lot to report until the decision is handed down in June.
Okay, well, we'll probably bug you about it anyway, but...
we'll constantly talk about it. We don't want people to forget that it's out there. And when that decision is handed down, it'll be a very, very busy day for everyone here at NRA.
Okay, well, thank you, Rachel. We appreciate you giving us a little update on that, and we'll see you again next week.
Absolutely. See you next week.
Bye-bye.